The sun was barely above the horizon, stretching long fingers of orange across the wide and dusty sky. The kind of morning that looked peaceful, like a painted backdrop, but didn't tell the full story. Somewhere just beyond the rolling hills and cactus patches, a group of crows circled overhead, their wings silent but sharp in the breeze. In the Wild West, nothing stayed quiet for long. Imagine waking up in a wooden shack, no thicker than a few planks hammered together, creaking with every gust of wind. There's no glass in the windows, just torn curtains fluttering like ghosts. Your blanket smells like old tobacco and horsehair, and your mouth is dry from breathing desert dust all night. There's no alarm clock to greet you, just the high-pitched howl of the prairie wind and the ache in your bones from sleeping on a straw mattress. You don't know it yet, but this will be one of the hardest days of your life. Because the Wild West was never designed for comfort, it was meant to be endured. You pull on your boots, worn thin and cracked at the heels. The leather rubs against your skin. It's the only pair you have, and they don't quite fit. Outside, the sun's already baking the ground, even though it's barely 6 in the morning. There's no time for breakfast. There's no food left, anyway. Just stale bread you couldn't bite through without soaking in water first, and some beans that smell faintly of rust from the tin. You glance down the narrow street of the dusty town. No name on the map, just a few weather-beaten buildings leaning into the wind like they're tired of standing. A saloon with peeling red paint. A sheriff's office with a crooked star nailed to the door. A general store that opens when it wants to, and a church that hasn't heard a sermon in weeks. The town isn't empty, but it sure feels like it. People don't speak much. They keep to their routines and to their weapons. Trust was a rare currency, and it didn't buy much. You were new here, a drifter with a stitched-up coat and a past you didn't talk about. Folks didn't ask. Everyone had something they were running from: outlaws, debts, old crimes. Some were looking to start over. Others were just trying to survive long enough to see another sunrise. There was no clean water in the well anymore. The last rain had dried up 3 months ago, and the river had moved on without saying goodbye. You drank what you could, lukewarm rainwater caught in barrels, or watered-down whiskey if the saloon keeper liked your face that day. People in the movies make the Wild West seem exciting. Horses and shootouts, gold in the riverbeds, sheriffs chasing bandits across open plains. But the truth? The truth was slower, quieter, and far more dangerous. Most people didn't make it out here. If the heat didn't get you, the cold would. If not the cold, then the snakes, or the food, or some outlaw with an itchy trigger finger. And if you were lucky enough to survive all that, then the silence might be the thing that finally broke you. It wasn't just the land that was hard. It was the waiting. Waiting for the next supply wagon that might not come. Waiting for the crops to grow, then watching them die anyway. Waiting for someone to write you a letter, only to find the stagecoach robbed again. That morning, you had a job to do. Nothing heroic, nothing noble. Just fixing fence posts on a cattle ranch a few miles north of town. The owner paid in coins so dull you could hardly tell what they were worth. You saddled a horse with tired eyes and a limp in its back leg, and set off down a trail so dry it cracked beneath the hooves. The air was thick with dust, and every few steps, grasshoppers jumped across the trail like warning signs. Coyotes howled from somewhere unseen. You knew better than to ignore them. Out here, you weren't the apex predator. You were just meat on legs. The fence was barely standing when you got there. Broken planks, wire rusted thin as paper. You pulled a hammer from your satchel, fingers numb despite the heat. Hours passed like days. Every nail was a battle. Every breath stung with grit. You worked until your palms bled and your back screamed. Then you heard it. Hoofbeats. But you hadn't seen anyone out here in hours. And you didn't hear them approach from behind. No dust cloud, no warning. Just that slow, steady rhythm like a drumbeat in the distance. You turned toward the sound, heart already tightening. A man in a long black coat appeared over the ridge. No one dressed like that unless they had a reason to be feared. He didn't speak when he rode up, just tipped his hat low enough to hide his eyes. His horse snorted, and you noticed it didn't have a brand. That was rare. Most horses belonged to someone. This one belonged to no one. Or worse, it had belonged to someone who no longer needed it. You said nothing. He said nothing. Just that strange silence, heavy as iron, stretching between you. He finally spoke. His voice was gravel and smoke. "You from around here?" You lied. "No." He smiled. Not kindly. "Good." That was all he said before turning and riding off again, but something about the way he said it made the heat around you feel colder. Your hand shook. You hadn't realized you'd been holding your breath until you let it go. There were no heroes in the Wild West. Only survivors. And even that was a title you had to fight for. Back in town, news traveled like lightning during a dry storm. Fast and dangerous. A ranch hand had gone missing south of the ridge. Just vanished. No blood, no tracks. Nothing but a hat left behind and a half-finished letter in his saddlebag. The sheriff said he'd look into it. He didn't. Sheriffs were as crooked as the jailhouse keys. Most towns were too poor to afford lawmen who weren't scared or dirty. Some were both. So when trouble came, you didn't call for help. You listened, stayed low, and waited for it to pass. You learned quick out here, or you didn't last long. Even at night, there was no peace. Coyotes circled the edge of town, eyes like embers. People locked their doors with more fear than faith. The saloon played slow piano tunes that sounded like lullabies for the dead. If you slept, you did it lightly, one hand on your belt buckle, the other near the lamp. Everything creaked. Everything moaned. Even the land itself seemed restless. People whispered about old mines that were cursed, railroads that never made it past the mountain pass, ghost towns where the wind howled through empty homes and broken dreams. Most of it was just talk, stories to scare children and keep drifters from wandering too far. But you weren't so sure. Something about this place felt off. Like time didn't move the same way. Like the sun rose and set not because it wanted to, but because it had to. And now, someone was following you. You started seeing shadows behind buildings. Boots where no one should be standing. A face in a window that vanished when you looked again. At first, you thought it was paranoia. This land did that to people. But it wasn't in your head. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. And you didn't know why. But you were about to find out. Because the next time you went out to the fence, the hammer was gone. In its place was a single bullet. Not new, not clean, but carved, with your name on it. You stared at the bullet for a long time. It sat there on the fence post, catching the sunlight just right, making it gleam like something valuable. But you knew it wasn't a gift. It was a message, and it was meant for you. Your name wasn't common. Not around here, anyway. And the carving wasn't messy or rushed. Whoever did it had taken their time. They wanted you to see it. Wanted you to understand that you were being hunted or warned. Or maybe both. You looked around, but there was no one in sight. Just the open land stretching forever in every direction. No trees. No hills to hide behind. Just the endless quiet of the dry plains and a faint wind curling around your collar. You picked up the bullet slowly, almost like it might burn your fingers. It was heavy, heavier than it should have been. Or maybe it was just the thought of it that weighed so much. You didn't put it in your pocket. You left it there, right where they had placed it. If someone wanted to scare you, they'd have to know they failed. But even as you rode back to town, your eyes kept scanning the horizon. Every rustle in the brush felt like footsteps. Every bird call sounded like a whistle. You couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching you from far away, just out of reach, but never out of sight. Back in town, the sun was starting to dip low. The sky turned to muddy gold, and the wind carried the scent of dry hay and horse sweat. People moved slower in the evenings, like their bones remembered too many bad things that happened after dark. You passed by the saloon. The piano was silent. That was rare. Even when the keys were out of tune, somebody was always trying to make music, trying to drown out the memories. But tonight, there was just silence. Inside, the tables were half empty. Men sat hunched over their drinks, whispering low like they didn't want the walls to hear. A couple of old-timers played cards with hands that shook more from age than nerves. You didn't stop. You didn't want to be seen asking questions just yet. You walked to the sheriff's office instead. The door was half open, swaying slightly with the wind. Inside, it smelled like dust and old leather. Sheriff Mott sat behind the desk, legs stretched out, boots crossed at the ankles. He had a ragged book open, but he wasn't reading, just staring at the pages like they used to mean something. He looked up when you stepped in. His face was lined and leathery, eyes half-lidded like a man who'd seen too much and didn't care to see more. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, not moving. "You didn't sit. Someone left me a bullet," you said, "with my name on it." The sheriff didn't flinch. He just blinked real slow, like he was waiting for you to say more. "It was out near the fence job. Clean placement. No footprints. Just the bullet. Hand-carved." "Carved?" he asked finally. You nodded. "Your full name?" You nodded again. Sheriff Mott scratched his chin. "Ain't the first time someone tried to send a message out here." "What does it mean?" He shrugged. "Depends on who left it. Could be someone wants to scare you off. Could be someone wants you dead. Or maybe someone wants you to start asking the wrong questions." You stared at him, waiting for more. But he didn't offer it. "You think it's a joke?" you asked. "I don't think anything out here's a joke," he said, too dry for laughter. You waited a second longer, then turned to leave. "Careful," he said behind you. "Sometimes out here, the message ain't the bullet. It's the silence that comes after." The words followed you out the door like smoke. You walked down the main street slowly, your boots dragging a little more with each step. The sky was red now like fire behind the mountains. And still, you felt like you weren't alone. That night, you stayed in a rented room above the general store. It wasn't much. One bed, one window, one lamp. The window had no curtain, so the moonlight spilled in wide and cold. You didn't light the lamp. You sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, just listening. Nothing. No wind. No creaking wood. No footfalls on the boards below. But you knew better than to believe in silence. After a while, your eyes adjusted. The shadows outside began to shift. You swore you saw movement at the edge of the alley across the street. Someone standing still, just watching. You leaned back slowly and reached for the small pistol under your bedroll. Your fingers touched it, cool and familiar. You held it in your lap and waited. Then a sound. Not loud, just a soft tap. On the window. You turned fast, heart thudding. But there was nothing there. You stood up, walked to the window, and looked out. Still nothing. The alley was empty. You opened the window slowly, letting the night air creep in. It smelled like dust and smoke. Then you noticed something. A second bullet, resting on the windowsill. No name this time. Just a symbol, carved deep into the metal. It looked like an eye. And underneath it, scratched faintly into the wood of the sill for words. "You're in the circle." You stared at the bullet for what felt like hours, but it was only a minute or two. You didn't touch it this time. Didn't even breathe too loud. That carving, an eye scratched by hand into the casing, looked back at you like it was alive. The words beneath it were even worse. "You're in the circle." "What circle?" You looked around the quiet street, moonlight making the town glow silver and ghostly. The shadows leaned in every direction at once. If someone was out there, they weren't showing themselves now. Not directly. Not yet. You closed the window gently, not because you were afraid of the sound, because you didn't want to make any. You left the bullet where it sat. That thing wasn't a threat. It was a promise, and you didn't need it rolling around in your pocket all day tomorrow like a weight you couldn't shake. That night, sleep didn't come easy. You lay on the bed, eyes open, heart slow but steady, mind turning everything over again and again. The fence post, the sheriff's words, the missing music at the saloon, and now this, the second bullet, this time marked with an eye. Whatever this was, it wasn't a random warning. It was planned, quiet, thoughtful in the worst kind of way. And you were part of it now, even if you hadn't agreed to be. When the sun rose, it came without ceremony, just a dull, yellow glare that pushed the dark back a few feet at a time. You sat up slowly, muscles stiff, lips dry. You hadn't dreamt, but your brain felt like it had wandered somewhere too far from your body all night. Downstairs, Mrs. Green, who owned the general store, was already sweeping the front porch with a straw broom worn thin at the ends. She nodded when she saw you. "Storm's coming," she said. You looked up. The sky was clear. "Not today," she added. "Soon." Inside, you picked up a few supplies, water, jerky, spare cartridges, and paid without speaking much. She watched you, though. You could feel it. Back out on the street, things felt different, as if everyone knew something and you were just a step behind. Even the horses at the hitching posts shifted uneasily, like they sensed the edge in the air. You made your way toward the livery to saddle up. The The stable hand, a boy named Eli, was already working up a sweat brushing down a mule. "You ride out yesterday?" he asked without looking at you. "Yeah," you said. "South Ridge. You see the tracks?" "What tracks?" He finally looked up. "Thought they were yours." "They weren't." Eli nodded slowly and returned to his work. "Guess someone's moving around out there after all." You didn't ask more. You didn't need to. By mid-morning, you were back on the trail, riding with the sun at your back. The air was still, the kind of still that made you wonder if even the birds had decided to stay quiet today. You rode toward the same fence line, partly because you needed to check your work, but mostly because you needed to know if someone would leave another message. The fence was still standing. The bullet from yesterday was gone. Not dropped, not kicked away, just gone. And next to the post where you found it, someone had placed a stone, a flat one, with a handprint pressed into the dirt beside it. You crouched, studied it. It was too small for a man's hand. Maybe a woman, or maybe someone younger, but it was deliberate, set there with care. Whoever was doing this wasn't just passing through. You didn't stay long. Something in your chest said move, and you listened. You rode east, cutting across the edge of a dry riverbed, and circled back toward town by a long route. You didn't want anyone watching your back trail. That's when you saw the smoke. Thin, white, rising from the hills beyond the canyon. It was too steady to be a campfire, too far to be anyone from town. You debated it for a minute. Going toward smoke in the west wasn't always smart, but avoiding it didn't feel right either. You nudged your horse forward and started toward it. It took most of the afternoon to get there. The terrain wasn't forgiving, rocky, uneven, and crawling with thorns. You had to dismount halfway and lead your horse up a narrow cut between the boulders. When you crested the ridge, you saw it. Not a fire. A cabin. Small, built into the edge of the rock like it had grown there. The chimney was the only part that looked new. Recent bricks, laid clean and careful. Someone was inside. You could hear the faint creak of a chair. Maybe the scrape of something metallic. Tools? Weapons? You tied your horse behind a brush and walked slowly toward the door. Before you could knock, the door opened. And there she was. She looked no older than 30, maybe younger, with sun-worn skin and steady eyes. Her hair was tied back with a piece of faded red cloth. She didn't hold a gun, but you could see one leaning nearby on a table. A rifle, cleaned and ready. "You're late," she said. You blinked. "Late?" She nodded. 3 days late, if you want to be exact. You stepped inside, slowly. The place was sparse. One chair, one table, a cot against the wall. Papers were spread out, maps mostly, and a single sheet with the same eye symbol that had been carved into your bullet. She pointed at it. "You saw this." You nodded. "On a bullet. That's their mark," she said. "The circle. They don't use names." "Who are they?" "They used to be law," she said softly. "Some of them still are." That hit you like a hammer. "Lawmen." She shrugged. "Once. Now they just call themselves keepers." "Keepers of what?" "Secrets. Lies. Buried things. Doesn't matter. All they know is how to keep people quiet. And now I'm in their circle." She looked at you for a long time before answering. "No," she said. "You were born into it." You didn't say anything for a moment. The air inside the cabin had turned heavier somehow, thick with the weight of words you hadn't been expecting. You were just here to ride fences, patch some wood, earn your keep. That was all. That was supposed to be all. "What do you mean I was born into it?" you asked finally. She turned her eyes toward the papers on the table. Her fingers moved across the map slowly, tracing an invisible path, one you couldn't yet see. "My name's Clara," she said. "Clara Hanley. My father was a circuit judge. Rode from town to town, settling land claims, marriages, even murders when the regular law couldn't be trusted. He kept records of everything, even the things no one else would." You nodded slowly. "And what does that have to do with me?" She tapped the paper with the eye symbol. "This circle, these people, they came after him for something he wrote down. Something they didn't want remembered. He didn't burn it. He hid it. And he gave part of it to someone he trusted before he disappeared." You stared at her. "You think that someone was my family?" Clara nodded. "Not think. I know. Your mother's name was Agnes. Agnes Train. She was the daughter of a rancher. Honest folk. One day, she just left the valley. No one knew why. Not until years later, when someone showed up asking about her child. You felt something shift in your stomach, like the floor of the world had tilted just slightly beneath your boots. I never knew her, you said quietly. You were meant to forget, Clara replied. That was the only way you'd stay safe. You sat down across from her, the chair creaking beneath your weight. Outside, the sun had dipped low enough to paint the world in gold and long shadows. The hills looked quiet, peaceful even, but the silence pressed against the windows like it was listening. Clara stood and opened a drawer under the cot. From it, she pulled a small, leather-bound book, worn along the spine and edges. She set it down between you. This is what's left of my father's notes. It isn't everything, not even half, but it points to a place. A box buried out past the hollow pine by the dry creek. You opened the book. Inside were scribbled lines, sketched maps, bits of phrases that made no sense on their own. Some words were smudged, others scratched out entirely. One name kept showing up again and again. Coulter. You said it out loud, and Clara nodded grimly. Marshall Elias Coulter. He was once a real man of the badge, but that was before the circle found him. Before he turned. What does he want? Clara hesitated, then sat down again. He wants a box. Or more importantly, what's inside it? My father found something. A record. Maybe a ledger. Maybe a journal. Something that could bring the whole circle down if it ever saw daylight. And I have a piece of it. More than a piece, she whispered. You were the reason it was hidden. Agnes didn't just take off. She ran because the circle was already closing in. They wanted her gone. But she knew too much, and she had you. That made you dangerous. You leaned back slowly. It was too much. Too many names, too many shadows behind every word. All this time, you thought you were just drifting through the West like everyone else, riding fence, minding your own, keeping your head down. But someone, somewhere, had known who you were long before you did. What now? You asked. Clara looked at you with something like sorrow. Now we go to the pine. She didn't wait for more questions. Just stood, gathered the rifle and a small leather satchel, and stepped outside. You followed. The ride was slow, quiet. The sun dipped behind the hills, and the wind began to rise, cool and soft, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke again, though you saw no fire. Just dusk settling like a blanket over the land. As the shadows deepened, you reached a grove where the trees leaned like old men, bent, tired, and wise. And there it was, the hollow pine. It didn't look like much, just a crooked old tree with a wide, gaping wound at the base, like something had clawed it open 100 years ago, and no one ever bothered to heal it. Clara dismounted and knelt near the base, brushing aside leaves, twigs, and dirt until a wooden box emerged, small, hand-carved and fastened with a strip of rusted iron. She handed it to you. You should open it, she said. You hesitated, then knelt beside her, fingers finding the edges of the iron strip. It wasn't locked, just wedged in place. You pulled it free and opened the box. Inside was a bundle of folded papers, bound together with string. But it wasn't just writing. Tucked between the pages were tiny objects, a rusted sheriff's star, a photograph with faces scratched out, a piece of yellowed ribbon stained with what might have been blood. You unfolded the first paper and read. It wasn't a confession. It was a list. Names, dates, places, executions. Some had the word cleaned written beside them. Others just had a black X. And halfway down the page, your mother's name appeared. Agnes Train. Next to it, escaped. Known associate, J. Hanley. Watch child. Your hand shook slightly as you passed the page to Clara. She read it in silence, lips tight, eyes distant. That's them, she murmured. That's their death book. You folded the paper and tucked it back into the box. The weight of it sat in your hands like stone. What do we do with it? You asked. We run, Clara said quietly. We ride north. There's someone in Fort Hays, still wearing a badge, but not bought by the circle. He can help. You nodded. Then we ride tonight. But before you could stand, Clara grabbed your arm, tight, urgent. Listen. You held your breath. There was again the sound of hooves. Far off. Maybe 2 riders. Maybe more. Coming slow. Deliberate. Clara blew out the lantern. The night swallowed you whole. The riders didn't speak, didn't whistle, didn't announce themselves. Just the slow, steady rhythm of hooves moving closer. And that's when you saw it, shimmering silver in the moonlight at the edge of the grove. A single bullet, stuck into the bark of a nearby tree. Carved with the eye. You stare at that bullet like it was breathing. It sat there, quiet as the grave, dug halfway into the trunk of that twisted pine. A shimmer of silver under the moonlight, just enough for your eyes to catch the marking carved into it. An eye, open wide, almost mocking in its stillness. Clara saw it too. She didn't speak. She just slowly reached over and pulled you down lower into the brush. The hooves were louder now. Not rushing, not panicked. Just steady, calm. Like whoever was riding had all the time in the world and no fear of what they'd find. That was the worst kind of sound out here. Casual confidence in the dark. Clara motioned with her fingers, 2 riders. You nodded. The box between you suddenly felt hot, like it was burning your hands just to hold it. The death book, the photo, the badge. All of it was too real now, not just history or whispers. Proof that this wasn't a story from someone's porch. This was now. The riders stopped maybe 20 yards off, just beyond the tree line. You couldn't see them fully, but you saw the glow of a cigarette tip flaring in the dark. A quiet flick, a slow exhale, no voices. Then, the sound of metal, a hammer being pulled back. You didn't breathe. The wind shifted. For a moment, everything stilled, and then one of the horses snorted, restless, and you heard a quiet curse from the trees. Male voice. Gritty. Worn. Too quiet, he muttered. The second rider responded, lower and colder. They're here. I can smell them. That's when Clara gently pushed your hand. Go. She mouthed it like a prayer. You didn't want to leave her, but she was already moving, slowly sliding herself toward the opposite side of the pine, the old rifle in her hands. She looked at you one last time, gave a tiny nod, then vanished into the brush. You held the box close to your chest, turned, and crept away in the shadows, careful not to snap a single twig beneath your boots. The horses were restless, and that cigarette flicked again, glowing brighter for a breath before dying back down. Behind you, there was a sudden rustle, then a sound like a branch breaking, and a sharp, startled shout. Then everything exploded into motion. A gunshot rang out, loud, sharp, cracking the stillness apart. Another shout, then 2 more shots. Screams in the trees. Horses rearing. You ran. Not because you were a coward. Not because you didn't want to help Clara. But because that's what she'd told you to do. Because that box in your hands suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Like you were carrying more than secrets. Like you were carrying every name that had been lost to silence. You reached the edge of a shallow ridge and slipped down it, catching yourself against the roots of a half-dead bush. The moon was higher now, painting the hills in ghost light. Everything felt too quiet again, too still. You paused behind a rock, pressed low, and waited. Another gunshot echoed behind you, then nothing. You didn't know if it was Clara or one of them. You didn't know if anyone was still alive back there. Your breathing was sharp in your chest, but you forced it down. Think, she said, Forhays. North. You looked up at the stars, the only map you had now. Clara had shown you once how the North Star never moved, how to keep it just over your left shoulder if you wanted to stay on track through the canyons. You started moving, step by step, over dry grass and shallow roots, careful not to leave too clear a trail. You moved like an animal, quiet, cautious, low to the ground. Every sound made you flinch. A night bird's cry, the snap of something far off, the wind shifting through dying trees. By the time the first light of morning began to rise, you were miles away. Your legs were aching. Your mouth was dry, but you kept going. The box never left your side. That morning, the sun came up like a firestorm, burning across the plains, turning everything gold and raw. You found a spot near a dried-up stream and rested. Just for an hour, you told yourself. Just long enough to catch your breath. But your eyes didn't stay closed long. You dreamed of the pine tree, of Clara calling your name, of riders with no faces, just eyes carved into silver bullets. You sat up with a start. Everything was quiet again. You weren't sure what time it was, but the shadows had shifted. A storm was coming. You could feel it in the air, heavy with dust and weight. The kind that crept in on you slow, then struck all at once. You had no horse, no food, barely any water, just the clothes on your back, the box, and whatever Clara had stuffed in your coat pocket before the fight. You reached inside and pulled out a folded cloth. Wrapped in it was a tiny revolver, old but oiled with 2 bullets. 2. You stared at them for a long time. Then you wrapped the gun back up and stood. The hills stretched out before you, bare, scorched, unforgiving. Somewhere up, there was Fort Hayes. Somewhere up, there was a man still trying to wear the badge the right way. Someone who could help. If you made it that far, you started walking again, one foot after the other, the wind kicking up dust behind you. And for a long while, it felt like maybe you were alone again. But you weren't, because just over the next rise, hidden beneath the brush, another rider watched you through a pair of old field glasses. He didn't speak. He didn't write anything down. He just stared at you for a while, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver bullet. He turned it slowly in his fingers. It had your name on it. You didn't know he was there. Didn't feel his eyes on you from the ridge. Didn't sense the slow breath he took as he watched you vanish behind a line of sunburnt cottonwoods. You just kept walking like a ghost of your own story, one bootstep at a time. By midday, your throat felt like you'd swallowed dust. Your tongue stuck to your teeth, and each breath scraped down your chest like it was made of sandpaper. The sun above was unrelenting. No clouds, no shade, just a white-hot sky and the faint buzz of flies somewhere far off. But still you walked. That's the thing about the Wild West. You couldn't stop. You couldn't ask it to wait. The land didn't care about your story. It didn't care who you were or what you were carrying. It only asked one question. Could you keep going? Most couldn't. You thought about Clara. The way she didn't flinch when she pulled the trigger. The way she pushed you away like she knew the story didn't end with her. Maybe she was still alive. Maybe she'd made it out. Or maybe you didn't finish the thought. Instead, you turned your attention back to the ground ahead. Cracked soil, a scattering of broken shale, and just barely visible in the dirt, the outline of a wagon will track. Old, maybe a day or two. Could have been settlers. Could have been someone hauling goods between forts. Or it could have been something else entirely. Still, it was a sign of movement. You followed it. The track curved east toward a dip in the land where a few scrub trees leaned tired against the wind. You paused beneath them, crouching low, and pulled out what little Clara had packed for you. A single dry biscuit wrapped in cloth, and a tiny glass bottle sealed with wax. You turned it in your hands. Inside, floating gently like dust and honey, was something that shimmered. Something gold. You'd seen it before, on the edge of town, when a miner had burst into a saloon and shouted about striking it rich. That same glow, that same shimmer. You unsealed it carefully. Just a sniff. Your eyes watered instantly. Strong. Chemical. Not gold, but something stranger. Oil? Whiskey? No, it was too thick. Too clean. You sealed it again and tucked it deep in your coat. Whatever it was, Clara thought it mattered. You stood slowly, legs aching, and moved on. The wagon track veered toward an old trail. Less a road, more a suggestion of one. Worn flat in places, vanished in others. You followed it all the same. After maybe another hour, you saw movement ahead. A shack, half sunk into the earth like it was trying to bury itself. Smoke rising from its chimney, thin and gray. You stayed low, watching from behind a clump of sage. Nothing stirred. No dogs. No people. Just that thread of smoke, unraveling quietly into the sky. You inched forward. As you approached, the smell hit you. Burnt beans, stale tobacco, and something else. Something sharp like old blood or spoiled meat. You reached the edge of the shack and crouched, ears straining. Still silence. Then creak. A door hinge, slow and tired. You pressed your back against the side of the building and held your breath. Another creak. Then footsteps. A shadow passed across the dirt floor inside. You didn't draw the gun. Not yet. A voice drifted out, raspy, talking to no one. Told him not to come round here. Said I'd shoot. Said I meant it. You peeked in. The man inside was ancient. Skin like cracked leather. A beard tangled halfway down his chest. He sat on a stool, stirring something in a pot with a knife instead of a spoon. He didn't look up, but he stopped stirring. I can't hear you, he said. You stepped slowly into the doorway. I don't mean trouble. you said gently. Just passing through. The old man grunted. You smell like death, he said. Like graves and gunpowder. You didn't respond. He pointed the knife at a stool near the fire. Sit, but don't touch anything. You did. The shack was filled with things, old maps, broken bottles, rusted tools. On the wall behind him, a line of photos. Not in frames, just pinned with old nails. Each one was marked with the same symbol you'd seen on that bullet in the tree. An open eye. He caught you staring. You know what that is? He asked, voice low. You nodded. Slowly. They're watching, he said. Always watching, even when you're out of sight. Even when you think you buried the past. It ain't dead. It just waits. You shifted uneasily. Who are they? He laughed. A dry, rattling sound. No one knows, he said. Not anymore. Some say it was a town, long gone. Some say it was a sheriff's cult. Others think it's the land itself, remembering names and settling scores. He paused, then turned and reached for a small metal box behind him. Whatever they are, he said, you're in it now. He opened the box and pulled out a bullet. Silver, carved with a name. Yours. You froze. He handed it to you like it was nothing. They left this on my porch last night. Means they're close. You stared at it. The letters weren't etched with a tool. They were burned in. Seared. Your fingers trembled. You need to leave, the man said. Now. Don't stop until you get to the Red Rocks. Red Rocks, you asked. He nodded. Landmark north of here. Shaped like a spine. Hidden trail behind him. Take it. Don't look back. You stood slowly, sliding the bullet into your pocket beside the gun. What happens if I don't make it? The man didn't smile. You won't get a second bullet. You stepped out of the shack, heart pounding, the wind tugging at your coat like it was trying to pull you back in. Behind you, the door creaked shut. Ahead, the trail waited. And somewhere, not far behind, a rider twisted a silver ring on his finger and began to follow. The road narrowed as you moved north, winding like a lazy snake through dry ravines and sharp outcrops. Every step made your boots heavier, not from dust or exhaustion, though there was plenty of both, but from the weight of that silver bullet in your pocket. It wasn't just metal. It was a message. You kept your eyes low, scanning the ground for signs. A hoof print here, a broken twig there. The wind blew steady from the east now, lifting grit and tiny pebbles, singing through the cracks in the rocks. Out here, wind was the only voice you heard. No birds, no cattle, no people, just wind. And your thoughts. You remembered your brother, long gone now. He was the one who always said, out here, you gotta know the difference between something that wants to kill you and something that's just curious. He said that once while you both watched a coyote from the ridge. It was just watching back. Quiet. Calm. Waiting. You wondered if that's what this land was doing now. Waiting. You moved carefully up the slope. The trail climbed into the hills, and for a brief stretch, the world seemed to pause. There was beauty here, quiet beauty. Red clay cliffs. Jagged rock spires that looked like frozen flames. Shadows moved gently across the canyon below. And then a sound. Distant. Soft. Hoofbeats. Not in front. Not behind. Beside. You stopped. The sound vanished. You turned slowly, scanning the ridge to your right. Nothing. Just silence. Then, from behind a large boulder, a shape moved. Dark. Steady. Mounted. A rider. You dropped low, crawling beneath a thorn bush. You could feel your heart beating behind your eyes. The rider didn't stop. You just sat there, horse still, back straight, watching. You waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then the rider turned and disappeared over the ridge, leaving only the sound of his horse's hooves. You let out a slow breath. That was no regular traveler. No male rider or settler. That was a message. They were watching. Still, you pushed forward faster now, sticking to the low path, slipping between dry creek beds and leaning mesquite. By late afternoon, the shadows stretched longer than your stride. The air cooled slightly, and you came upon a cluster of old rocks, a camp circle, long abandoned. A good place to rest, just for a moment. You knelt beside the stones and sifted through the ashes. Cold, but not too old. Someone had been here recently. Then you spotted it, another symbol, this time carved into a flat rock near the edge of the circle. The eye again. You backed away slowly. This wasn't random. They weren't following you because they saw you. They were guiding you, hurting you, toward something. You didn't know what. By the time the red rocks came into view, the sun was sinking low. They rose from the land like bones, tall, jagged, red as blood under the sunset. You reached them just as night began to press down, the first stars blinking quietly overhead. The old man was right. There was a path behind them. You circled around carefully and found a narrow trail, almost hidden by brush and stone. It dropped down into a canyon, and the walls closed in around you as you entered. The air felt cooler. The wind didn't reach down here. It was quiet, too quiet. You lit a small oil lamp Clara had packed. Its glow was soft, just enough to light the path beneath your boots. Every so often, you thought you heard something behind you. The scrape of a boot, the jingle of metal. But when you stopped to listen, there was nothing. Just your own breath and the low flicker of flame. Then, up ahead, the trail opened into a clearing. You froze. There were stones tall, flat, standing in a circle, weathered by time, worn by wind. In the center, a wooden box sat on a pedestal made of stacked bones. Real bones. You didn't move, didn't blink. Then you heard it again, the rider's voice. Not loud, not near, just an echo. You've come far too far. You turned, lamp shaking in your hand. No one. The shadows danced against the stones, casting strange shapes. Shapes that didn't match what was there. Faces, maybe, or memories. You stepped into the circle. The air was different here. Heavy, like it was holding its breath. You approached the box. It wasn't locked, just closed with a simple latch. You hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter. Yellowed, folded. No name, no seal. You opened it slowly and began to read. If you're holding this, then you were never meant to survive the Wild West. This land isn't history. It's a test, a mirror. It shows you who you are by tearing away everything else, your comfort, your safety, your illusions. Those who survive aren't lucky. They're hollow. And those who come looking for answers never find what they expect. You carry something now, not just in your hands, in your name. They'll follow it. They'll whisper it. And when you reach the end, you won't recognize yourself. Turn back, if you still remember the way. You lowered the letter. The lamp flickered once, then went out. Pitch black. You reached for your matches, but something moved behind you. A breath. A step. The faint scrape of metal against stone. You didn't turn, because something told you. If you turned, you wouldn't leave this place. The wind found its way into the canyon again, low and long like a sigh. And in that moment, you understood. The Wild West wasn't about survival. It was about surrender. To the unknown. To the silence. To the ghosts of things you hadn't yet seen. You stood there, motionless in the dark, and waited. You didn't sleep that night. There was nowhere safe to close your eyes. Not inside the stone circle. Not near the bones. And definitely not with the feeling that someone, or something, was still watching from the darkness. You sat with your back to the canyon wall, one hand on the hilt of your knife, the other holding the now-cold oil lamp. Time passed slowly. The stars turned overhead like distant lanterns, and each rustle of wind through the brush made your spine stiffen. At some point, the darkness began to lift. A dull, gray light crept into the canyon. Not quite morning, but enough to see shapes again. You got to your feet, stiff and sore, your breath visible in the cool air. The wooden box was still there, the bones still silent, but the letter gone. You searched the ground, inside the box again, all around the base of the stones. Nothing. That wasn't the kind of thing you could explain away. The Wild West had its own rules, ones they didn't teach in books. You'd heard stories growing up, strange tales told by travelers with cracked lips and tired eyes. Stories about trails that disappeared, about riders who didn't cast shadows, about small towns that vanished overnight. You never believed any of it. Not really. Not until now. You climbed out of the canyon slowly, glancing back one last time before the stones disappeared from view. Whatever this journey was, it was no longer just about delivering a package or surviving the desert. It was about understanding what you'd been pulled into, or maybe what you'd always been part of without knowing. Back on the trail, You made your way toward the next landmark the old man had mentioned, Split Tree Ridge. He said if you reached that point and turned left instead of right, you'd find answers. You didn't know what kind of answers he meant, but at this point, any direction was better than standing still. As the sun rose higher, the heat returned. Not harsh yet, but steady. You passed more dry creek beds, scattered bones of cattle long dead, and old wagon wheels half buried in sand. Reminders of others who had come before. Maybe they were looking for something too. Maybe they found it. By midday, you reached a wide flat plain with a single tree standing tall at the far end, Split Tree. It wasn't much to look at, just a thick, gnarled trunk with two large branches reaching out in opposite directions, forming a perfect Y against the sky. The kind of marker you couldn't miss, even from a mile off. You stopped in its shade and drank the last of your water. The road to the right led to the old trade post, marked on maps, talked about by ranchers, visited by drifters. The road to the left was nothing but open land. No trail, no signs, just heat and silence. You went left. The land felt different again, as if you had stepped off something solid and into something less certain. The sky seemed wider, the wind thinner. Even your own footsteps felt quieter, like the dirt didn't want to remember them. You walked for miles, watching the hills shift in the distance like slow-moving ghosts. There were no birds, no insects, not even the sound of your own breath felt normal. Then you saw it. A fence, not wooden, not barbed, just a line of tall iron poles spaced evenly apart, each one with a strange mark etched near the top. The line stretched east and west, far beyond what your eyes could follow. You approached slowly, looking between two of the poles into the distance. On the other side was what looked like a small building. An old schoolhouse, maybe, or a church, but it didn't belong. The structure looked too clean, untouched by wind or time. Its wood was pale, like it had never seen a storm. No dust clung to the windows. No birds perched on the roof. And the land around it? Flat, perfect, like it had been shaved smooth. You stepped between the poles. The air shifted instantly. Colder, sharper. A low hum tickled the edge of your hearing, so faint it could have been imagination. But it stayed. You walked forward, every step slower than the last. The building didn't change, didn't grow closer. It just remained still, waiting. You reached the front steps and looked at the door. It was open just a crack. No sound came from inside. You pushed the door open. Inside, the room was empty. No pews, no chalkboard, just a floor of polished wood and 4 windows letting in pale light. On the far wall, another symbol had been carved, the same eye, but this one had tears beneath it. You took a step inside. The hum grew louder, and then silence. Everything stopped. Your ears popped like pressure had dropped suddenly, and the door slammed shut behind you. You ran to it, heart racing, and pulled, but it wouldn't move. Not even a wiggle. Then you heard it, a low voice, calm and tired, speaking from somewhere near the floorboards. "Why'd you come here?" You turned slowly. No one, just shadows. The voice came again. Same tone. "You're not the first. You won't be the last. But you should have stayed on the trail." You backed up against the wall, scanning every corner, every window. The voice didn't rise, didn't shout, just kept talking like someone reliving a memory. "They all think they can find the truth out here. But the truth doesn't live in stories. It lives in silence. It lives in choices you don't get to take back." You whispered, unsure if you were even speaking aloud. "Who are you?" No answer. Only footsteps now. Soft, slow, from beneath the floorboards. And then, just like that, the door creaked open. You stepped out quickly into the cold light again. The wind had picked up. Dust circled around your boots. The building behind you didn't look the same anymore. The paint had peeled. The windows were cracked. And the roof had caved in. You looked back at the fence. The poles were gone. No trail behind you. No landmark ahead. Just a wide, empty plain. And somewhere far off, a single rider watching from a ridge. You didn't move. Not right away. The rider on the ridge hadn't budged either. They just sat there, high in the saddle, like they'd been waiting. Not close enough to see a face, but something about the posture, the stillness, wasn't natural. In the Wild West, stillness like that wasn't peace. It was warning. You stepped back once, slowly. The figure didn't follow, didn't wave, Didn't turn. It vanished. Not rode away, just vanished. Gone like a dust devil in the wind. You looked behind you again, expecting the building to be there, but now even that had changed. The walls had collapsed in on themselves like a structure that had been abandoned for 50 years. One of the windows still hung crooked in its frame, but the rest of it was sinking into the earth like it had given up. You weren't sure where you were anymore. No fence, no trail, no sound. The air felt strange too, heavier. Each breath sat in your lungs like it didn't belong. You turned toward what looked like the lowest point in the land, figuring that maybe, just maybe, a stream or road might snake through. Something you could follow. But every direction felt the same. You started walking anyway. Time passed differently out there. It wasn't like the desert outside town, where the sun marched across the sky like a predictable enemy. Out here, the light changed at odd angles. Long shadows stretched out ahead of you, then behind you, then circled like wolves. There was no wind, yet dust still lifted in small swirls across the flat land, as if footsteps from something invisible kept pace beside you. You didn't look over your shoulder. Not yet. Then you saw the stone. Just one at first, round and pale, sitting in the dirt like a forgotten gravestone. Then another, and another, arranged in a perfect spiral. Not natural. These have been placed with care. You followed the spiral inward, one step at a time, until you stood in the center. A name had been scratched into the middle stone. Your name, exactly as you wrote it. The sound that came out of your mouth wasn't quite a word, more like breath breaking apart. You knelt down and touched the stone, cooler than the air, almost damp. You rubbed your name away. It didn't fade. You stood and backed out of the spiral, careful not to step between the stones again. Your heart was moving faster than your feet now, and even though nothing was following, every inch of your skin felt watched. By mid-afternoon, the land finally started to shift. You saw the beginning of a low ridge on the horizon and pushed toward it. Your legs were tired. Your throat was dry, but the shape of the land gave you something real to aim for. At the top of the ridge, you saw it, a town, or what used to be one. No people, no animals, just leaning buildings, some missing roofs, others with boards nailed in crosses over their windows. A church with no steeple, a saloon with one swinging door, creaking slowly in the breeze. You started down the slope, half expecting the place to disappear if you blinked too long. But it didn't. It stayed there, like a ghost holding its breath. As you reached the edge of the town, a sign swayed on two rusted chains. Welcome to Lament. You'd never heard of it. Not in stories. Not on maps. Not even from the old man who sent you on this fool's path. You stepped into the street, dust up to your ankles, and listened. Nothing. Not even wind now. You tried a door on the first building. It opened easily. Inside was a general store, still mostly intact. Shelves full of faded tins. Coats hanging on wall hooks. A pair of boots near the counter, facing the door like someone had left in a hurry. But everything was thick with dust, like it hadn't been touched in decades. And there was something else, an odor. Not foul, not rotting, but old, like dry flowers or burned paper. You moved behind the counter and spotted something odd, a journal. Bound in red leather, edges worn smooth by years of handling. You opened it. The first page was blank. Second page, too. But the third. June 4th, 1871. Stranger came down from the ridge. No horse. No hat. Said he was lost, but I think he was looking for something. Same name as the last one. Same eyes. Your throat dried even more. You flipped ahead. June 8th. The winds stopped again. Same as before. You don't remember why he came. But he's dreaming. Same dreams we all had. Same stones. Same voice. Ain't no way out after that. The final entry, dated one day later, just said, mark the spiral. Leave no names. You closed the journal and left it where you found it. Outside, the town felt different now. Still empty, but no longer still. Like the buildings were holding a breath. You crossed to the church, the largest structure, and stepped inside. A man was sitting in the front pew. Head bowed, hat in his hands. He didn't turn when you stepped closer. Been a while, he said, his voice soft but scratchy, like wind through dry leaves. You said nothing. Waited. Every 10, maybe 15 years someone comes through. Same story. Different eyes. He turned finally. His face was older than it should have been. Eyes sunken deep into shadow, but calm, knowing. You think you came here by accident? You shook your head, unsure if it was truth or just instinct. You were pulled, he said, just like the rest of us. The rest? You asked finally. He pointed behind you. You turned. The pews were full. Dozens of people, silent, unmoving. Men, women, some young, some older. All dressed from different times. A miner. A schoolteacher. A soldier in a faded blue uniform. A woman in a long black dress holding a baby that didn't cry. None of them looked at you. They just sat, waiting. You turned back to the man. He stood now. Everyone who came here came looking for something, he said. Truth. Escape. Answers. But the Wild West, it was never about finding anything. It was about surviving what you weren't meant to understand. He stepped closer. You remember the spiral? You nodded. Good. Then you already know what comes next. The light from the windows dimmed. A sound began again, the low hum you heard at the fence. The air thickened. The faces in the pews began to lift. And behind you, the church door slammed shut. The slam echoed through the empty church like a gunshot. Your heart jumped, muscles tensed. You spun around toward the doors, but they were locked tight. No way out. The man in front of you didn't flinch. Instead, he turned slowly and walked toward the altar, the rows of silent faces following his movement with hollow eyes. The hum grew louder, almost a low vibration now, like the earth itself was settling beneath your feet. You swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the impossible moment. How'd you get here? Why was this place so dead, yet somehow alive? And who were these people sitting so still, like statues trapped in time? You stepped back, searching for an exit, any crack or window to squeeze through, but the pews hemmed you in. The man's voice broke the thick silence again. Lament isn't just a ghost town. It's a trap, a mirror. You frowned, confused. A place where the past and present bleed into each other. Where those who tried to survive the Wild West found themselves caught between time and memory, unable to leave. Your eyes darted to the faces around you. Some stared straight ahead. Others looked down, as if carrying unbearable secrets. Why are you telling me this? You asked, voice barely above a whisper. Because you're next, he said. Next. The words slammed into you harder than the door. The man's eyes locked onto yours, steady and unwavering. You think this is about surviving the Wild West? It's about surviving yourself. You shook your head, disbelief mingling with fear. I don't understand. He smiled, faint and sad. Few do at first. He motioned toward the altar, where a dusty old book lay open. The pages yellowed and fragile, but the words were clear. Every soul who came to lament left a story behind. Some stories are written in stone, others in blood. This one, he said, is yours. You stepped closer, drawn to the book. The handwriting was elegant, looping letters like something from a well-kept diary. You began to read. Day 1. I thought I could handle it. The heat, the dust, the loneliness. I was wrong. The land is unforgiving. The people, even more so. You looked up. The man was gone. For a moment, panic hit you like a wave. You called his name, but the church swallowed the sound. The faces in the pews didn't move. They didn't blink. It was like you were completely alone. But then a faint whisper drifted across the room, soft as a breeze but sharp as a knife. Remember. You spun toward the sound, but nothing was there. You clenched your fists and tried to steady your breath. What did you need to remember? And why? Outside the church, the sun was setting, casting long orange fingers through the stained glass windows. The colors danced on the dusty floor, painting patterns that looked like broken promises. The air grew colder, even inside. You closed the book and looked back to the pews. Slowly, the faces began to change. They blinked. Some turned their heads just a little. The woman with the baby looked directly at you, eyes wide and pleading. You took a cautious step forward. Who are you? You asked her. She didn't answer, but held out her hand. You hesitated, then reached out and took it. Her grip was cold, too cold. You pulled back quickly. Suddenly, a noise filled the room. Footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate, coming from the back of the church. You spun around again, searching the shadows. A figure emerged, tall, dressed in dust-covered leather, a hat pulled low over his eyes. He stopped at the doorway, surveying the room. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and warning. You took a step back. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the altar. The faces in the pews shrank back as if afraid of him. Some disappeared entirely, fading like smoke. He stopped beside the altar, reached out, and touched the open book. "Every story has an ending," he said. You felt a chill run down your spine. Except when it doesn't. The church grew darker. Shadows stretched and twisted. You wanted to run, but your feet felt rooted. "Why am I here?" you demanded, voice trembling. The man looked at you then, his eyes hard and unreadable. "Because the West wasn't meant for you." You swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. The West was a place of harsh truths. Hard lives. It didn't care about the dreams of men who came looking for glory or gold. It chewed them up and spit them out. And sometimes it swallowed them whole. Your mind reeled. You thought of all the stories you'd heard growing up. Lawmen, outlaws, settlers struggling to make a life. You thought you knew what survival meant. But here, in this crumbling town, you realized how little you understood. The man stepped closer. "Tell me," he said quietly, "how long do you think you'd last out there? In the real West? A day? An hour? Or just a moment?" You opened your mouth to answer, but no words came. He nodded slowly. "The truth is, most didn't last long. Not because they were weak, because they were unprepared. Because the West demands more than courage. It demands something else, something harder to see." Your eyes darted around the room, to the faces that now seemed more like ghosts than people. Something like, "You began." "Sacrifice," he finished. A heavy silence fell between you. You tried to steady your racing thoughts, but the feeling that you'd been lured here for a reason only grew stronger. The man turned to the door again. "You have a choice," he said. "Stay here with the lost, or face what waits outside." You followed his gaze. Outside the church, the sky was bleeding red. A cold wind whipped through the broken windows, carrying voices you couldn't quite understand. You felt the weight of the unknown pressing in. And then, as the last light disappeared, the doors creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, bathed in shadow. You recognized the silhouette. It was the rider from the ridge. But this time the horse was gone. The rider stood motionless in the doorway, his figure swallowed by the night. Without the horse, he looked smaller, almost fragile, but the weight in his presence was undeniable. He stepped forward slowly, boots scraping against the dusty wooden floor. Every movement felt deliberate, like he was carrying a secret too heavy to share. Your breath caught in your throat as you watched him approach. The flickering candlelight revealed the outline of a weather-beaten face, shadowed by the brim of a tattered hat. His eyes, when they finally met yours, held a strange mix of warning and sorrow. "Why did you come here?" you asked, voice barely steady. He paused, fingers twitching as if holding back a story long buried. "Because the West never forgets," he said quietly. "It keeps its debts, and sometimes it collects them in ways you wouldn't believe." Your heart pounded. The air seemed to thicken with his words, like the church itself was listening. "I don't understand," you admitted. "What debts? Who do you mean?" He looked down, tracing invisible patterns on the dusty floor. "The ones who try to cheat the land. The ones who thought they could bend it to their will. They paid. In blood, loss, and loneliness." You swallowed hard, feeling the weight of history press down on you. The Wild West wasn't just about gunfights and saloons. It was a harsh reality, filled with invisible dangers and unseen consequences. The rider straightened and looked back toward the altar. "Lament," he said, "is more than a place. It's a reminder, for those who live and those who don't." You glanced back at the pews. The faces seemed even more lifeless now, almost statues frozen in a moment that never ended. "What happens to the people here?" you asked. He shook his head. "They're trapped, stuck between what was and what could have been, waiting for someone to tell their story right." You felt a shiver run down your spine. Could you be that someone? Was this place asking for your help? Or was it a trap meant to keep you here forever? The rider turned back to you, eyes sharp and steady. There's something you need to know. The West is full of ghosts, not just the dead, but the choices left behind. Every step you take out there echoes with the past. You can't outrun it. You can't hide. His words echoed the warning you had heard earlier, but now they carried a weight you couldn't ignore. Why am I here? You asked again, desperate for an answer. Because you're not ready, he said. Not for the West. Not for what it demands. You frowned. But I thought surviving the West was about being tough, smart, quick. He smiled, but it was a bitter, sad smile. That's what they say. But it's not enough. The West tests more than your strength. It tests your soul. You're able to keep going when everything wants to break you. You looked around once more. The stained glass windows caught the moonlight, casting strange shadows that seemed to move on their own. The church felt less like a shelter and more like a cage. Is there a way out? You whispered. The rider's eyes darkened. There's always a way, but it's not the one you want. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn object, a silver locket, tarnished by time. He opened it, revealing a faded photograph of a woman and a child. Her name was Mary, he said softly, and this is her son, Thomas. They came here hoping for a new life, like many others. But the West had other plans. You stared at the picture, feeling a pang of sorrow. Faces frozen in time, dreams left unfulfilled. What happened to them? You asked. The rider's jaw tightened. They disappeared, like many others. Some say they were taken by the land itself. Others believe something darker. You shivered. The mystery deepened. Is that why this place feels so wrong? You asked. He nodded slowly. Because it is. Lament is a crossroads between life and death, past and present. A place where the lost come to remember, and sometimes to warn. You felt a growing sense of urgency. The peaceful stories you imagined about the Wild West were nothing like this. This was a world of shadows and secrets, where survival meant more than just staying alive. Can I help them? You asked, voice trembling. The rider looked at you with something like hope. Maybe, but first, you have to face what you're running from. You blinked, confused. He leaned closer, voice barely a whisper. The West doesn't just take your body. It takes your fears, your regrets. If you want to leave, you have to confront them. Your mind raced. What fears? What regrets? Before you could ask, a sudden noise cut through the silence. A sharp, desperate cry from outside. You both turned toward the door. The rider's eyes narrowed. They're coming. You stepped back, heart hammering. Who? You asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached behind the altar and pulled out an old rifle, worn but sturdy. Get ready, he said. The church doors burst open with a gust of wind, and the night flooded in, bringing with it shadows that seemed to reach and twist toward you. Figures appeared in the doorway, silhouettes moving fast, voices low but urgent. You realized with a start they weren't ghosts. Not yet. Run, the rider ordered. But where? The pews blocked every path. The figures drew closer, their faces still hidden in darkness. You looked around frantically, searching for an escape. The rider raised his rifle, eyes blazing with determination. This ends tonight, he said. The first figure stepped into the light. It was a man, face marked by dirt and sweat, eyes wild. Leave this place, he growled, or become like us. You froze. Become like them? The rider fired once. The shot rang out, shaking the walls. The man stumbled, then vanished into thin air. You blinked, unable to process what you saw. Who are they? You demanded. Souls lost to the West, the rider said. Caught between worlds. Hungry for what they never had. You swallowed. This isn't just history, you whispered. It's a curse. He nodded. And it's spreading. The church trembled again, dust falling from the ceiling. You felt the cold creeping in, deeper and colder than before. Are you ready? The rider asked. You didn't know, but the choice was no longer yours. The shadows pressed closer, and the story you thought you knew, the one about surviving the Wild West, was about to change forever. The night outside was unforgiving, the line between past and present blurred beyond recognition. You had stepped into a world where history wasn't just something to learn, it was something to survive. And the true battle had only just begun. The cold air seemed to crawl over your skin as you stood in that dim church, heart still pounding from the encounter. The rider's rifle hung heavy in his hands, eyes scanning the shadows that twisted beyond the doorway. You could still see the faint trace where the man had vanished, as if swallowed by the night itself. "It's not over," the rider said, his voice low but steady. "They don't leave easily. These lost souls, they hold on to grudges, to pain. They want to pull others down with them." You shivered, wrapping your arms around yourself. The silence in the church was thick, broken only by the creaking of old wood settling and the faint rustling of wind outside. You felt as if the whole place was watching, waiting for the next move. "Who were those people?" you finally asked. "Why are they trapped like this?" The rider looked away, shadows hiding his face once more. "Folks who made bad choices. People who thought they could tame the West without paying the price. Lament is where their regrets keep them. It's a kind of prison, but not the kind you'd expect." You stepped closer, trying to understand. "What do you mean?" He sighed, heavy with memories. "It's like the land itself remembers everything. The betrayals, the violence, the lost hopes. And it holds on to that. The dead don't rest here, not truly. They're caught between what happened and what should have happened." Your mind reeled at the idea. The stories you'd heard about the Wild West were always about adventure, about heroes and villains. But this was something darker. A place where the past was alive and dangerous. "How did you get here?" you asked, curiosity breaking through the fear. The rider's eyes flicked back to you, a flicker of pain in them. "I came looking for answers. Like you. But the West doesn't give answers. It tests you. It strips everything away until you're left with just the truth." You nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words. "So, what happens now?" He raised a rifle again, eyes sharp. "Now, we survive the night. Because there's more coming." Before you could react, a cold wind swept through the church, rattling the windows and sending a chill deep into your bones. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch and pulse, growing darker, more solid. Suddenly, from the far side of the church, a soft whisper echoed, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Help us!" You turned toward the sound, heart quickening. The rider motioned for silence, his gaze fixed on the darkness. "They're calling," he said, "trying to draw us out." Your skin prickled with unease. You wanted to run, to leave this place behind, but something rooted you in place. The need to understand, to see this through. The whispers grew louder, weaving into a chorus of sorrow and warning. Faces began to flicker at the edges of your vision. Faint outlines of men, women, children, frozen in moments of pain and regret. Their eyes pleaded, but there was no peace in them. "Why are they trapped?" you asked, voice barely above a whisper. The rider lowered his rifle, stepping toward the altar. "Because they couldn't forgive themselves, or be forgiven. The West can be unforgiving. Sometimes the scars run deeper than the flesh." You followed him, eyes fixed on the flickering faces. The air felt heavier, as if the building itself was bending under the weight of the past. "Is there a way to help them?" you asked. He paused, then nodded slowly. "Maybe, but it won't be easy. You have to face your own darkness first." A sudden crash interrupted the moment, a sound from outside, loud and urgent. Both of you froze, listening. "They're back," the rider said grimly. You peeked out the cracked door and saw movement, shadows shifting near the edge of the town. Figures emerging from the darkness, slower this time, but no less threatening. "They don't want visitors," the rider warned, "especially ones who ask questions." You swallowed hard, the weight of the situation pressing down harder than ever. This wasn't just about surviving the Wild West anymore. It was about understanding its ghosts, facing your fears, and uncovering the stories that history forgot to tell. The rider stepped toward you, his voice low and serious. "If you want to stay, if you want to learn, you have to be ready to see the truth, no matter how dark." You nodded, though your hands trembled. The night stretched ahead, full of shadows and secrets, and you knew there was no turning back. Together, you moved to block the church doors, bracing yourselves for whatever was coming next. Outside, the night whispered warnings. Inside, the past waited patiently for its story to be told. And you, caught between both worlds, realized this journey had only just begun. The night outside the old church deepened, swallowing the faint glow from the lanterns inside. The rider's steady breathing was the only sound until, in the distance, a low murmur grew, like voices carried on the wind but just out of reach. You glanced toward the cracked doorway, tension coiling in your chest like a tightening rope. Those shadowy figures moving outside weren't just ghosts. They were reminders of every hard choice, every moment of desperation that had shaped this place. Inside, the rider paced slowly, rifle in hand, but eyes alert. Lament is a place of lost stories, he said quietly, and every story here is tangled with pain. You think the Wild West was about freedom and new beginnings, but often it was about running from yourself, from the law, from a past that never lets go. You watched as his gaze drifted to the faded wooden pews, their surfaces cracked and worn by years of neglect. I used to believe the stories of brave cowboys and daring outlaws were the whole truth, you admitted. But standing here, I feel like I'm seeing the underside, the real Wild West no one talks about. He nodded. The truth is messy. It's full of broken dreams and bitter grudges. And it's not just the people who died here who are trapped. It's the choices they made that haunt the living too. The voices outside edged closer, blending with the wind's mournful howl. You could almost make out phrases, pleas, warnings, names whispered like secrets in the dark. What do they want from us? You asked. Attention, the rider replied. Recognition. They don't want to be forgotten. Each of them was someone once, with hopes, fears, mistakes. The problem is, they never got the chance to move on. As you listened, you realized there was more than one story waiting to be told. Beyond the surface of this haunted town, tangled lives had crossed in ways that made the past impossible to escape. You thought about the stranger you'd met earlier, the one who'd warned you to leave. What had brought him here? Was he like you, searching for answers? Or was he something else, bound to lament in a different way? Your thoughts were interrupted by a sharp sound, footsteps approaching from the back of the church. You both turned toward the noise, rifles ready. The door creaked open, and a woman stepped inside, her eyes wide but steady. Her clothes were worn but clean, and there was a fierce determination in the way she held herself. "Who are you?" the rider demanded, keeping his rifle raised. She hesitated, then said softly, "My name is Clara. I've been looking for my brother. He disappeared out here months ago. They say no one survives in lament, but I have to find him. I have to know what happened." You exchanged a glance with the rider. Clara's presence added a new layer to the mystery. Was she risking everything for a family she might never find again? Or was there something deeper pulling her into this web? The rider lowered his rifle slightly. "You're brave to come here, but lament doesn't give up its secrets easily. If your brother is here, he's caught in the same trap as the rest." Clara's jaw tightened. "Then we help each other. If we don't figure this out together, none of us will leave." Her words sparked a fragile hope, but you knew better than to trust easily. The Wild West wasn't kind to the hopeful or the naive. Every step deeper into lament felt like stepping into a story with no clear ending, a place where every truth was tangled with a lie. Outside, the whispers rose again, swirling like a storm on the edge of breaking. The shadows moved closer, circling the church like predators, testing their prey. "We can't stay here," the rider said. "They'll find a way in if we're not careful. But if we run, we lose our chance to understand. The past is the only way forward." You nodded, feeling the weight of the choice. Stay and face whatever haunted lament, or flee and let its mysteries remain buried. Clara took a deep breath and stepped toward the altar, eyes scanning the dark corners. "I've heard stories about a map," she said. "Something my brother found, said it would lead to answers, maybe even a way out. But no one's ever seen it since." The rider's face darkened. "Maps in places like this are dangerous. They promise escape, but often lead to more traps. Still, if it exists, it might be our only hope." You felt a chill crawl down your spine. The idea of a map, a tangible piece of the past that might unlock the future, was both thrilling and terrifying. What if it was a key? Or what if it was a curse? As you debated the next move, the church's fragile silence shattered. A loud banging echoed at the front door, shaking the wooden frame. The whispers outside had become urgent cries, and you could see shadows pressing against the glass, trying to break through. The rider moved quickly, blocking the door with a heavy pew. "They're restless tonight," he said, "more than usual. Something's coming." You glanced at Clara, whose face was pale but resolute. "We can't let them in," you said, "but we also can't ignore what's out there." Suddenly, the whispers turned into clear voices, pleading and angry, desperate and sorrowful. They told stories, fragments of lives lost to greed, betrayal, and heartbreak. Names you didn't recognize, but somehow felt familiar. Stories that pulled you deeper into the darkness, into the heart of what made Lament a place frozen in time. And through it all, the question hung in the air. Could anyone truly escape the past, or were you doomed to become just another lost soul, swallowed by the endless night? The tension inside the church was unbearable, the unseen eyes watching, waiting. You knew the dawn was still hours away, and the fight for survival, for truth, was far from over. The banging on the door grew louder, more frantic, like a storm threatening to break through the fragile walls of the church. The rider tightened his grip on the pew, muscles tense, while Clara and you exchanged worried glances. The faces in the shadows outside seemed to press even closer, their whispers turning into angry murmurs, voices filled with pain and regret. It was clear this night in Lament was far from ordinary. "Why tonight?" you asked, your voice barely a whisper, the cold seeping into your bones. The rider shook his head. The past never rests, but sometimes it stirs, when something shifts, when a secret is uncovered. That map Clara mentioned, it might be the spark. Clara's eyes flickered with determination. "My brother was obsessed with that map. Said it would lead to something buried, something the town's been hiding for decades. Maybe it's the key to why the dead won't move on." You could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down, the promise of a mystery tangled with danger. The Wild West had always been painted as a place of rugged freedom and adventure, but here, in Lament, it was a trap woven from sorrow and unfinished stories. The rider's voice was low, almost a warning. If that map leads to answers, it might also unleash what's been waiting in the dark. We're dealing with more than just memories here. Your mind raced. What could be so powerful that it kept these restless souls bound? Greed? Betrayal? Or something darker? An injustice so deep it tore the very fabric of this town? Outside, the pounding on the door shifted into a harsh scraping sound, as if something or someone was trying to pry it open. The church creaked and groaned under the assault, and you realized this was no ordinary haunting. The dead, or whatever haunted this place, wanted in. The rider moved swiftly, pulling a heavy wooden chair to reinforce the door. "We hold this line," he said firmly. "If they get inside, it'll be chaos." Clara nodded, clutching a small satchel tightly to her chest. "I don't know what's in here, but my brother left it for a reason. It might help us." Your curiosity piqued despite the fear. "What's in the satchel?" She hesitated before pulling out a worn journal, its leather cover cracked and stained with age. "This is my brother's diary. It's full of notes about the map and the town's dark history. He believes someone was hiding the truth, something they didn't want anyone to find." The three of you huddled around the journal's pages, the flickering lantern casting dancing shadows across the worn words. The entries told of disappearances, secret meetings, and rumors of a powerful figure who controlled Lament from the shadows, a man whose name was never spoken aloud. "He was the law," Clara whispered, voice trembling. "Or at least, he pretended to be. But behind the badge, he was something else." The rider's jaw tightened. "A corrupt sheriff. That explains a lot. In towns like this, the law and crime often wore the same face." You felt a chill run down your spine. The idea that the very person meant to protect might have been the source of so much pain and fear fit the restless energy swirling through Lament. "What happened to him?" you asked. The rider's gaze darkened. "No one knows for sure. Some say he vanished. Others that the townsfolk took justice into their own hands. But his shadow still lingers. Outside, the sounds of the restless spirits grew louder, almost as if they were urging you on. The journal's pages hinted at a hidden chamber beneath the town, a place where secrets, and perhaps the map, were concealed. Clara looked up, determination shining through her fear. "We have to find it before they do, before the past consumes this place entirely." The rider nodded. "But we're not just racing against time. We're racing against something else, something that wants to keep those secrets buried." You swallowed hard, the weight of the unknown pressing down heavier with each passing moment. The Wild West had never been just about survival of the fittest. It was about facing the ghosts of the past in all their messy, painful truth. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the church. You spun around, heart pounding, as a shattered window let in a cold gust of wind that extinguished the lantern's flame. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the cracks. The rider raised his rifle, eyes scanning the shadows. There inside, a sudden movement caught your eye, a shadow slipping silently across the floor, too quick to be human. Clara's breath hitched as more shapes emerged from the darkness, their forms twisting and flickering like smoke. The voices returned, but now they were clear and urgent, pleading for release, for recognition, for justice. One figure stepped forward, a woman in tattered clothing, her eyes hollow but filled with sorrow. "Find the truth," she whispered. "Break the chains." You felt the weight of her gaze, a silent demand that settled deep into your soul. "We don't have much time," the rider said, voice tight. "If we don't act soon, the past will consume us all." Clara clutched the journal to her chest, eyes blazing. "Then let's finish what my brother started." As the spirits closed in, the shadows thickening around you, it became clear this was more than a fight for survival. It was a battle for the truth, a truth that could either free the lost souls of lament or trap you all forever in its restless grip. And with that, the night stretched on, darker and more uncertain than ever before. The cold air hung heavy inside the church, mixing with the rising tension that seemed to pulse through every cracked plank and broken window. The spirits, though unseen in full, pressed closer like a living fog, their voices soft but urgent, weaving through the silence like a whispering wind. Clara tightened her grip on the journal, her knuckles white with resolve, while the rider kept his rifle raised, his eyes darting across the shadows, searching for movement. "I don't like this," the rider muttered, voice low and steady. "We're not just dealing with ghosts. Whatever's here is anchored by something much darker. This town's wounds are still fresh, and they're bleeding into the present." You swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity rise inside you. The stories you'd heard about the Wild West, the shootouts, the lawlessness, the rough lives of cowboys and settlers, had never prepared you for this. This was different. It was a place trapped between life and death, with a past claw to the present, refusing to let go. Clara looked up from the journal, her eyes shining with a strange light. "My brother's last entries talk about a hidden room beneath the old sheriff's office. He believed it was where the truth was buried, secrets that could explain why the dead never left. The sheriff's office is just a few blocks from here," you said, feeling a sudden rush of urgency. "If we can find that room, maybe we can understand what's keeping this town frozen." The rider nodded. "But it won't be easy. The place has been abandoned for years, and whatever's guarding it won't let us walk in unchallenged." Outside, the restless voices began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence that wrapped around the church like a shroud. It was as if the spirits were waiting, watching to see what you would do next. "We have to move," Clara said firmly. "The longer we stay here, the stronger they become." With cautious steps, the three of you slipped out into the cool night air. The moon hung low, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Lament. The town looked frozen in time, buildings crumbling yet stubbornly standing, windows boarded up but somehow still whispering secrets through the cracks. As you walked, the rider kept glancing over his shoulder, alert for any signs of danger. Clara's grip on the journal never faltered, her eyes scanning the darkened streets as if she could see through the years of silence. When you reached the sheriff's office, a crumbling brick building with faded letters barely visible above the door, the weight of history settled over you like a stone. The place smelled of dust, rust, and forgotten memories. The rider pushed open the heavy door with a creak that echoed through the empty building. Inside, the air was thick and stale, filled with shadows that clung to every corner. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and broken furniture lay scattered like the remains of some long-forgotten battle. Clara flipped open the journal, searching for clues. "He mentioned a trapdoor under the floorboards," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere near the desk." You moved toward the desk, running your fingers over the rough wood. After a few moments, you felt a slight depression in the floor, a loose board, just as Clara had described. With a shared glance, you lifted the board, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. A cold draft rose from below, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and decay. The rider raised his lantern, illuminating the stairs as you descended one by one. The air grew colder, heavier, as you moved deeper underground. The walls were rough stone, damp and uneven, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed in the distance. At the bottom, you found a small chamber, its walls covered in strange symbols and faded writing. In the center lay an old wooden chest, bound with iron bands rusted by time. Clara approached slowly, her breath catching as she reached for the lock. "This is it," she whispered, "the truth my brother was chasing." As she pried the chest open, a rush of stale air spilled out, carrying with it a sense of something long hidden but not forgotten. Inside were papers, maps, and a small, worn leather pouch. You sifted through the documents, realizing they told a story far darker than you'd imagined. The sheriff's corruption had run deep, bribes, cover-ups, even murders disguised as accidents. Names of townsfolk who had disappeared without a trace, their fates unknown. The map, marked with strange symbols and lines, hinted at hidden tunnels beneath the town, paths that might lead to a final secret, or perhaps an escape. Suddenly, the chamber's silence was broken by a distant rumble. The ground beneath your feet trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. The rider raised his rifle again. "We're not alone." A chilling wind swept through the chamber, carrying the voices of the restless dead, louder and clearer than before. "We must leave," Clara urged, fear flickering in her eyes. "Before it's too late." You scrambled up the stairs, clutching the chest tightly. As you emerged into the sheriff's office, the first light of dawn was just beginning to break over the horizon. But the town of Lament was still shrouded in shadow, its secrets far from uncovered. And the past was not yet ready to let go. The first rays of sunlight struggled to pierce the thick veil of fog that clung to the streets of Lament, wrapping the town in a ghostly shroud. You could almost feel the weight of the past pressing down, heavier than ever before. The secrets you'd uncovered in that hidden chamber beneath the sheriff's office weren't just old stories. They were the pulse that kept this town trapped, tangled in its own dark history. And now, with the chest in your hands, the line between past and present felt thinner, almost ready to break. Clara's eyes flicked nervously toward the horizon, where shadows stretched long across the dusty streets. "We can't stay here," she said quietly. "If the spirits know we have that chest, they'll come for us. This isn't just about history anymore. It's about survival." The rider, always watchful, scanned the empty buildings as if expecting the walls themselves to come alive. "We need to find the tunnels the map points to," he said. "If the sheriff's secrets are buried there, it's the only place left to look. But it won't be safe. Whatever guards that place isn't just a ghost." You swallowed the lump in your throat. The idea of descending once more into the cold, dark underground, deeper into the heart of this haunted town, was terrifying. Yet something stronger than fear pushed you forward. The need to understand, to face whatever was waiting in the shadows. The three of you moved cautiously, stepping over cracked boards and broken glass as you made your way toward the edge of town where the map had marked an entrance. The sun was rising now, casting a pale light that did little to ease the feeling of dread settling in your chest. At the edge of an overgrown field, hidden beneath a rusted iron grate, you found the entrance to the tunnels. Clara took a deep breath and pulled the heavy cover aside, revealing a narrow, descending stairway swallowed by darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and musty, filled with the scent of earth and something faintly metallic, old blood, maybe, or rusted chains. The rider lit a torch, the flame flickering wildly as you stepped down one by one into the black void. The walls were rough, carved from the dirt and stone beneath the town, and the silence was thick, too thick, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. You held the chest tightly, feeling its weight more than ever, as if it carried the weight of every secret, every injustice buried beneath Lament's dusty streets. The map led you through a twisting maze of tunnels, narrow passages opening into small chambers filled with relics of the past, rusted tools, broken furniture, faded photographs pinned to crumbling walls. But the deeper you went, the more the air seemed to pulse with something unseen. Whispers drifted just beyond hearing, the faintest brush of movement at the edges of vision. Clara paused at a carved doorway, covered in symbols you'd seen before in the sheriff's hidden chamber. "This has to be it," she said, voice barely a whisper. "The heart of it all." The rider raised his rifle, eyes sharp. "Stay close. This is where it gets dangerous." You stepped through the doorway into a vast underground cavern. The walls were covered in ancient graffiti, names, dates, warnings scrawled in hurried hands. In the center stood a large stone pedestal, cracked and worn, with a hollow at its top where something had once rested. The chest suddenly felt heavier in your hands, as if it was drawn to this place. As you approached, the whispers rose into voices, swirling around you like a storm. The shadows deepened, shapes forming just out of reach, faces twisted in sorrow, anger, and pain. Clara's hands trembled as she set the chest on the pedestal. "This is it," she said, "the truth they wanted to hide." The rider scanned the cavern, muscles coiled for action. "But I don't think they want that truth uncovered." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the cavern, dust falling from the ceiling as the ground shifted beneath your feet. The voices rose into desperate cries, the shadows twisting into shapes that lunged toward you. The air crackled with energy, the very walls seeming to breathe, alive with the weight of decades of secrets and sorrow. You could feel it now, the restless past reaching out, demanding justice or vengeance. And in that moment, you knew this was the climax of everything. The final confrontation between the living and the dead, the truth and the lies. The shadows pressed closer, the voices louder, and the chest on the pedestal seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The rider shouted, "Hold your ground. We're almost there." But the tension was unbearable, the line between safety and doom razor thin. Every step forward felt like walking on a thread stretched tight over a vast abyss. And then, just as you reached out to open the chest, everything froze. The silence slammed down like a heavy door. The secrets of lament hung in the balance. The question was simple, but terrifying. Would the truth set the town free, or bury you all in its darkness forever? The growl reverberated through the cavern like a living thing, ancient and angry. Your heart hammered in your chest as you stepped back from the pedestal, the chest now seeming almost alive, its wood pulsing faintly beneath your fingertips. The shadows twisted around you, shapes becoming more defined, faces full of rage, eyes glowing with a terrible light. It was no longer just whispers or echoes. This was something real, something furious. Clara's voice barely rose above a whisper, trembling with fear and awe. "This isn't just a ghost story. This is something much darker. The town's secrets, They've been guarded for a reason. The rider tightened his grip on his rifle, scanning every corner of the cavern. Whatever's down here, it's protecting more than just old bones and memories. We've disturbed something no one was meant to find. You could feel the tension thickening, the air growing heavier as the shadows crept closer, the room's temperature dropping sharply. The weight of history pressed down on you all, an invisible force that threatened to crush your resolve. Every instinct screamed to run, but curiosity and a need for truth kept you rooted. Then, from the darkest corner of the cavern, a sudden movement startled you. A figure stepped forward, not one of the shadows, but a person, emerging from the gloom with slow, deliberate steps. His eyes glinted coldly in the torchlight. It was someone you never expected to see again. Thought you could come down here and take what doesn't belong to you. His voice was low, rough, filled with a bitter edge that cut through the tension like a knife. The rider's eyes narrowed. I should have known you'd be involved in this somehow. The man smiled, a grim, twisted smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lament's secrets don't die easily, and neither do the people sworn to keep them. Your mind raced. This was the sheriff's deputy, the one who had disappeared years ago, rumored dead or worse. He'd always been a shadow himself, a man with loyalty tangled in dark deeds. Now he stood before you, alive and more dangerous than you'd imagined. Why are you here? Clara demanded, steadying her voice despite the fear tightening her throat. He laughed, a sound without humor. I'm here to make sure the past stays buried. You think the truth will set anyone free? It only brings destruction. The shadows seemed to swirl around him, feeding off his anger, growing stronger. Suddenly, the cavern trembled again, and the chest on the pedestal glowed with an eerie light, as if responding to the tension between you. You took a step forward, trying to steady your shaking hands. We just want to understand, to know what happened here. He shook his head slowly, stepping closer, the glow from the chest casting sinister shadows on his face. You don't understand the cost of that knowledge. People died to keep this secret, and if you open that chest, more will die. Clara looked at you, eyes wide but resolute. The weight of the moment was crushing, but the choice was clear: turn back now, or face whatever darkness awaited inside. Before you could speak, the ground beneath your feet suddenly gave way. You stumbled, catching yourself just in time, but the deputy vanished into the shadows, his laughter echoing around the cavern like a curse. The rider cursed under his breath. We're running out of time. The tunnels are collapsing, and whatever's down here is waking up. You glance back at the chest, its glow pulsating stronger, filling the room with an unnatural light. The voices whispered louder now, desperate, angry, begging for release or warning of doom. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with dust and dread. Every step you took felt heavier, as if the weight of history itself tried to pull you down into the earth. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed from deeper in the tunnels. A blast of cold air rushed past you, carrying the faint scent of smoke and something worse. Decay, despair, something ancient and unforgiving. We need to move, Clara urged, her voice urgent. Whatever's coming, it's not just shadows. It's something alive, something that's been waiting. As you turned to follow the rider, you caught one last glimpse of the deputy's silhouette fading into the darkness, his warning still ringing in your ears. Some truths are better left buried. The chest remained on the pedestal, glowing like a heartbeat in the cavern's dark core. It called to you, promising answers but threatening danger. The choice lay before you. Open it and face the consequences, or leave the secrets locked away forever, hidden in the shadows of lament. And just like that, the line between past and present blurred, and the story of the Wild West forgotten town took a dark, twisted turn, one that would test your courage and change everything you thought you knew. The question was no longer if you would survive this day, but what price you'd pay to uncover the truth hidden beneath the dust and silence. The shadows whispered louder, the earth groaned beneath your feet, and the night waited, hungry and unrelenting. Just as your fingers brushed the edge of the chest's lid, a sudden, sharp cracking sound echoed through the cavern. making you all jump back. The stone pedestal trembled, and dust rained down from the ceiling. A deep, low growl seemed to rise from the very earth beneath your feet, vibrating through the walls like the warning growl of some ancient beast. The shadows recoiled for a moment, but then surged forward with renewed fury, as if something had been awakened, something far more dangerous than restless spirits. Clara's breath hitched, eyes wide with shock. That wasn't just the building settling. Something? The air grew colder as you and your companions hurried through the twisting tunnels, the faint glow of the chest left behind casting long shadows on the rough stone walls. The deputy's warning echoed in your mind, gnawing at your courage. He wasn't just protecting secrets. He was guarding something deadly, something that had been waiting patiently in the darkness for years, maybe decades. Clara's torch flickered, casting nervous light ahead as she glanced over her shoulder. We need to find another way out, or we'll be trapped down here with whatever's coming. The rider, ever vigilant, scanned every corner, rifle ready. There's a chance the old smuggler's route leads outside. It's risky, but it might be our only option. You nodded, swallowing the lump in your throat. The walls felt like they were closing in, and every step seemed to echo louder, as if the tunnels themselves were alive with warning. The deeper you moved, the stronger the smell of smoke and decay became. The rider paused, putting a finger to his lips. Listen. For a moment, there was silence. Then a low, guttural growl rumbled from the darkness ahead. The sound wasn't quite human nor animal. It was something primal and terrifying. Your pulse quickened. The shadows ahead seemed to flicker and move, as if something was stalking you, just beyond sight. Clara swallowed hard. I don't think we're alone down here anymore. As you rounded a bend, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber, half collapsed and choked with debris. Among the rubble, you spotted strange markings on the walls, symbols similar to those in the sheriff's hidden chamber, but older, more weathered. Someone had been here long before the town had ever been founded. Suddenly, a sharp snap echoed from above. Dust and small stones rained down as the ceiling trembled dangerously. The rider shouted, "Get out! Now!" You all scrambled toward a narrow side passage, hearts pounding. The earth shook beneath your feet as the cavern began to collapse. Rocks tumbled and crashed, blocking the way you had come, trapping you deeper in the underground labyrinth. Breathing hard, you pressed on, the only light coming from Clara's flickering torch and the distant glow that seemed to pull you forward. It was the chest's light, like a beacon, tempting and terrifying all at once. The passage narrowed, forcing you to squeeze through tight spaces. Your skin scraped against the cold stone, and the air grew thinner, harder to breathe. Still, you couldn't ignore the pull of that glow, like a promise of answers waiting just ahead. At last, the tunnel opened again, this time into a small chamber filled with ancient artifacts, rusted weapons, cracked pottery, and faded photographs. The relics told a story of people who had lived and died here, forgotten by time. But among the items, something new caught your eye, a dusty journal, its leather cover cracked but intact. You picked it up carefully, opening to a page filled with hurried handwriting. The words told a chilling tale, a tale of betrayal, violence, and a secret society that had shaped the fate of the town from the shadows. The sheriff wasn't just a man. He was part of something bigger, something that reached far beyond the dusty streets of Lament. Clara leaned in, reading over your shoulder. This explains why the deputy disappeared, and why the sheriff's office was hiding so much. The writer frowned. If this society is real, then the dangers we face aren't just ghosts or spirits. They're people who want to keep this secret at any cost. The chest's glow grew stronger, casting eerie light across the chamber. You felt a sudden chill, as if the past was watching you, waiting for the moment you would reveal its darkest truths. Then, without warning, a cold wind swept through the room, snuffing out Clara's torch. Darkness swallowed you all, thick and suffocating. Your breath caught as whispers filled the air, soft, urgent voices speaking in a language you didn't understand. The shadows moved, swirling around you like a living fog. The rider's voice was steady, but low. Stay close. Don't let them separate us. You linked arms, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down like a storm. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping in a rising chorus that threatened to drown out reason. And then, a sudden, sharp crack. A light flashed, revealing the deputy standing before you again. But his eyes were different now. Cold, empty, like something else had taken over. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, voice distant, almost mechanical. "The secret is not for you. Leave now, or be part of the darkness forever." The shadows surged forward, closing in as the cavern seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The chest on the pedestal blazed with light, a beacon that both beckoned and warned. Your heart pounded fiercely. The moment of truth was near. Would you uncover the secrets hidden beneath the Wild West's dusty streets, or would you be consumed by the shadows that guarded them? The air thickened, the tension unbearable, and the future of lament hung in the balance, on the edge between revelation and ruin. The deputy's cold stare bore into you, his voice like a whisper from some long-buried nightmare. "You don't understand what you're meddling with. This town's history isn't just a story, it's a curse." Clara swallowed hard, trying to steady her shaking hands. "We have to know the truth. It's the only way to break the cycle." The deputy's lips twisted into a grim smile, but there was no warmth in it. There is no breaking it, only surviving it, or becoming part of it. His words hung heavy in the air as the shadows around him deepened and thickened, stretching like tendrils reaching out to snatch at your very soul. The rider raised his rifle, eyes scanning for any sign of weakness or escape, but the oppressive darkness seemed to absorb the light from his torch, swallowing up every glimmer of hope. You felt the chest's glow flicker once again, pulsing like a heartbeat, as if warning of the choice that lay before you. To open it would be to unleash the full weight of the town's secrets and the dangers that came with them. Your mind raced. The deputy's warning echoed in your ears, but so did Clara's determined voice, reminding you why you had come this far. The answers were here, buried beneath layers of fear, lies, and time. And you were standing at the edge of it all. Suddenly, the cavern trembled violently. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling, and the walls seemed to close in, as if the earth itself was trying to swallow you whole. The shadows writhed and shifted, forming shapes, faces of the past, twisted in pain and rage. "Move!" the rider shouted, gripping your arm as he pulled you away from the deputy, who seemed to dissolve into the darkness, his voice fading but still echoing. The tunnels collapsing. You ran, heart pounding, as the ground shook beneath your feet. Behind you, the glow of the chest blazed brighter, casting long, eerie shadows on the crumbling walls. The voices grew louder, a haunting chorus of warning and despair. Clara stumbled, catching herself just in time. "This way," she cried, leading you down a narrow passage barely visible in the fading light. The tunnel twisted and turned, each step more desperate than the last. The air grew thick with dust and the smell of earth and smoke. You could hear the roar of falling rocks behind you, and the shadows seemed to press in closer, like unseen hands reaching to drag you back into the darkness. Finally, you burst into a small chamber, panting and gasping for air. The glow of the chest was gone, but the weight of what you had uncovered, and what was still waiting, pressed on your mind. The rider leaned against the wall, his face grim. That deputy wasn't just protecting a secret. He's part of something much worse. This town's darkness goes deeper than we imagined. Clara looked at you, eyes wide with fear and wonder. "What do we do now? We can't just leave it buried. But if we stay, we might never get out." You swallowed hard, the truth settling like a stone in your chest. The Wild West wasn't just a place of dusty streets and gunfights. It was a maze of secrets and shadows, where survival meant facing things far more terrifying than bullets. The chest, the deputy, the shadows, they were all pieces of a puzzle that threatened to consume everything you thought you knew about this forgotten town. And as the distant rumble of collapse echoed through the tunnels, One question burned in your mind. Would you find the strength to face the darkness, or would the Wild West's secrets claim you forever? The night outside was silent, but down here, beneath the earth, the past was far from done whispering. The heavy silence that followed your escape from the collapsing tunnels felt like a brief reprieve, but deep down, you knew it wouldn't last. The weight of the secrets you'd uncovered in that dark chamber clung to you like a shadow you couldn't shake. The rider's warning echoed in your mind, and Clara's determination clashed with the deputy's grim words. There was no easy path out of this mystery, only the uneasy choice of what to face next. Back on the surface, the dusty streets of Lament felt eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that settles before a storm. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long orange streaks across the wooden buildings, their faded paint and weather-beaten signs telling stories of better days. But beneath that peaceful facade, the town held its breath, as if aware of the danger creeping back beneath its skin. You stood in the main street, the rider and Clara close behind, each of you lost in thought. The rider's eyes were hard, scanning every shadow, every flicker of movement. "We can't stay here long," he said quietly. "If the secret society knows we're poking around, they'll come after us." Clara's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed a growing fear. "Then what do we do? Run? Hide? That doesn't seem like surviving to me." You took a slow breath and looked around. This wasn't just about uncovering the past anymore. It was about outsmarting a force that had shaped this town from the shadows, weaving control through whispers and fear. You had to find allies, but trust was a rare commodity in Lament. Your thoughts were interrupted by a soft creak, a door swinging open down the street. An old woman stepped out, leaning on a cane, her eyes sharp and knowing. She looked straight at you, and without hesitation said, "You don't belong here." Not yet. Her words were a puzzle, but something about her felt different, like she carried the weight of the town's history herself. Clara took a cautious step forward. "We're just trying to understand what happened here. The tunnels, the chest, the deputy." The woman nodded slowly. "Many have tried. Few have lived to tell. The society you seek to uncover is older than the stones beneath your feet. They watch, they wait, and they punish." The rider stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on his rifle. "Who are you? How do you know so much?" She gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm someone who's lost too much to silence. But you," she pointed a gnarled finger at you, "you might still have chance." Before you could ask more, she turned and shuffled down the street, disappearing into the gathering dusk. Her words lingered, more chilling than the coming night. Back in the shadows, you debated what to do next. The chest's light had drawn you deeper into a secret that reached into every corner of the town's past, and now it threatened your very future. The deputy's warnings, the cryptic symbols, and the whispers in the tunnels weren't just warnings. They were a map to a larger, darker truth. You realized survival wouldn't come from avoiding the secret. It would come from facing it head-on. But to do that, you need to understand the society's origins, its motives, and the terrible price they demanded. As night settled over Lament, the town seemed to shift. Windows shuttered, doors bolted, and a cold wind swept through the streets, carrying the faintest hint of old fears. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a sharp, lonely sound that echoed the unease settling into your bones. You looked at Clara and the rider, both poised for what came next, but clearly feeling the weight of what lay ahead. "We need to go back to the sheriff's office," you said. "There has to be more there, something we missed." Clara nodded, her resolve hardening. "And maybe we'll find more clues about this society and why the deputy disappeared." The rider's expression was grim. "Whatever we find, it won't be easy. They don't want their secrets uncovered." The walk back was tense, each shadow seeming to hold hidden dangers. The sheriff's office was dark, the heavy wooden door creaking as you pushed it open. Inside, the stale smell of dust and old paper filled the air. You moved carefully, retracing your steps to the hidden chamber beneath the floorboards. There, the symbols on the walls seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. You studied them again, trying to decipher their meaning. Clara traced a finger over the worn carvings. These aren't just random marks. They're warnings or maybe instructions. Suddenly, a loose stone shifted under your foot, revealing a small, weathered box hidden in the wall. Inside were letters, yellowed with age, written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. You read aloud passages that spoke of rituals, oaths, and sacrifices made to protect the town's power, and silence the voices that threatened to expose them. The letters hinted at betrayals, dark deals made in the dead of night, and a terrible event that had been buried along with the chest and its terrible secret. You could feel the story tightening around you, the past reaching forward like a snare. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. This society controlled everything, but at what cost? The rider stepped back, eyes sharp. And who else is part of this? If the deputy was just a pawn, how deep does the corruption go? As you pieced together the fragments of the past, a sudden noise outside broke the silence. A faint shuffle, a whisper of footsteps on the porch. You exchanged a quick look, hearts pounding, and moved toward the door. Peering out, you saw no one, but the streetlight flickered, casting shifting shadows that seemed to move with a will of their own. You knew then that the secret society was watching, waiting to strike. Back inside, you locked the door and turned to your companions. We're running out of time. If they want to stop us, they'll come soon. The night closed in around you, thick with danger and mystery. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the threat. And as the wind howled outside, you couldn't help but wonder, would you survive what was coming next, or would the Wild West's darkest secret finally claim you? The answer lay just beyond the shadows, waiting to be revealed. The night grew colder, the wind outside swirling like restless spirits as you, Clara, and the rider prepared for what felt like the inevitable confrontation. The letters in the old box had revealed enough. The secret society had ruled Lament with fear and silence for generations, using power and violence to keep their control intact. The deputy's disappearance wasn't an accident. He tried to expose them and paid the price. Now, it was your turn to face whatever was waiting in the shadows. You could feel the tension thick in the air as you quietly moved toward the back of the sheriff's office, where a hidden trapdoor led to a small, forgotten cellar. It was rumored to be the meeting place for the society, a place where oaths were sworn and punishments decided. If you wanted answers, this was the place to find them. Every creak of the old wood beneath your feet sounded like a warning. Clara whispered, "We have to be careful. One wrong move, and this could all end tonight." The rider nodded, his hand steady on his rifle. "I've faced worse odds. Let's just get this done." You descended into the cellar, the air damp and cold, the walls closing in like a cage. There, beneath a single flickering lantern, sat a rough-hewn wooden table surrounded by empty chairs. But the emptiness didn't last. Slowly, figures emerged from the dark corners. Faces you recognized, trusted townsfolk, and even those who had once seemed friendly. The society's reach was deeper than you'd imagined. One of them, an older man with sharp eyes and a thin mustache, stepped forward. "You shouldn't have come here," he said quietly. But there was no anger, only a cold certainty. "You don't understand what you're up against." You met his gaze. "We understand enough. The town deserves to know the truth." There was a heavy pause, and then the room filled with murmurs, fear, anger, and something else. A challenge. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from above. The heavy wooden door to the cellar burst open, and shadowy figures poured down the stairs, weapons drawn. The fight you dreaded had begun. The rider fired warning shots, pushing back the attackers. Clara moved quickly, grabbing the letters and the small box with the chess symbol etched on the lid. You realized these were the keys to breaking the society's hold. Proof of their crimes and secrets that could destroy them. But as the chaos unfolded, you noticed something strange. The older man watching with calm eyes, unarmed, almost detached from the violence. Then it hit you. He wasn't just a leader. He was the last survivor of a broken promise, someone trapped by his own guilt. In a swift moment, he spoke, voice steady but heavy. The society was never meant to rule through fear. It began to protect us from worse dangers, from chaos outside these walls. But power corrupted us. The chest, the rituals, they were meant to seal that darkness away. Your heart pounded as the weight of his words sank in. The secret society wasn't just about control. It was a desperate attempt to contain something far darker than any of you had imagined. The battle reached its peak. Bullets flew, shouts echoed, and the cellar seemed ready to collapse under the strain. But with one final stand, you and your companions pushed back the attackers, forcing them to retreat into the shadows they came from. Breathing hard, you looked around at the wounded and shaken faces. The older man approached you, eyes filled with sorrow. The chest contains a curse, an ancient evil. If it's opened, the whole town could be lost. Clara held the box tightly. We have to destroy it. The rider shook his head. Destroying it could make things worse. We need to understand it first. As you debated, a sudden tremor ran through the floor. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a deep rumble echoed through the walls. Something beneath lament was waking. The older man's face drained of color. It's starting. The evil is breaking free. Panic surged, but you held firm. You knew the town's fate rested on what you did next. With no time to waste, you led Clara and the rider back to the tunnels, this time armed with knowledge and the resolve to end the curse once and for all. But just as you reached the chamber with the chest, the final twist struck like a lightning bolt. The rider suddenly turned, eyes dark with a secret you hadn't seen coming. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I can't let this end the way you want." Before you could react, he revealed a hidden badge, the true lawman of this land. His mission wasn't just to protect the town from the society, but to guard the curse itself, to ensure it stayed locked away at any cost. You realized the real battle wasn't just against a secret society or an ancient evil. It was against the very people sworn to protect you. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and the fight for survival became even more complicated. The chest's lid creaked open slowly behind you, glowing with an eerie light. The darkness was rising, and your story was far from over. Would you trust the rider, confront the curse, or find another way out? The answer would decide the fate of lament, and whether anyone would survive a day in this Wild West nightmare. The glow from the chest filled the dim cellar with an eerie light, casting long shadows on the walls and making every breath feel heavy. The rider's sudden reveal had shaken you to your core. His badge, shining in the flickering light, symbolized a truth you hadn't expected. He wasn't just an ally, but a guardian of a secret far greater than the power struggles that had torn the town apart. "You have to understand," he said quietly, his voice steady but weighted with years of burden. "This curse isn't just some legend. It's real, and if it ever escapes, the whole region, maybe more, could fall into chaos." Clara looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Then what do we do? How do we stop it?" He paused, eyes locked on the chest as the light pulsed like a living heartbeat. "We lock it away, but in a way that no one can find it again. This secret society, you saw what they became. They weren't meant to guard it forever, but the world isn't ready for it either." You took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle over you. It was no longer just about uncovering corruption or exposing hidden crimes. This was about protecting everyone, even if it meant carrying a burden that could never be shared. Clara stepped forward, her fingers trembling as she carefully closed the chest's lid. The light faded slowly, leaving only shadows behind. "We can't let fear rule us," she said softly. "But we also can't ignore what's real." The rider nodded, pulling a key from his pocket. "I've kept this safe for years. It seals the chest in a hidden vault deep beneath the town, where no one will find it by accident." Together, the three of you made your way back through the tunnels, the air still thick with unease. Outside, the town of Lament seemed quiet, but you all knew the peace was fragile. The secret society had crumbled, but its legacy and the curse remained. As dawn broke over the dusty streets, townsfolk began to emerge cautiously from their homes. Rumors would spread quickly now, whispers of the dark truths revealed and the fight that had taken place beneath their feet. But the details would stay hidden, locked away with the chest, a secret kept for the safety of all. You and Clara stood near the sheriff's office, watching the sun paint the sky with soft pinks and golds. The rider's presence was steady beside you, no longer just a mysterious stranger, but a protector in his own right. "I never thought I'd be part of something like this," Clara said quietly. "But maybe that's what life is, facing the things you don't understand and finding a way through." You nodded, feeling a strange calm after the storm. The Wild West had tested you in every way: danger, betrayal, ancient curses, but had also shown you resilience, hope, and the power of truth. The rider finally spoke, his gaze distant. "Some things are better left buried, but that doesn't mean we forget. We remember, so we don't repeat the past." As you looked out over the town, you understood that survival wasn't just about gunfights or toughness. It was about knowing when to fight and when to protect, when to expose, and when to hide, all while holding on to what made life worth living. Lament would carry its scars, but the people could start to heal, to rebuild trust and community. The darkness might never disappear completely, but by facing it, you had given the town a chance to survive a day, and maybe many more beyond. The rider tipped his hat, preparing to leave as quietly as he had arrived. "Keep your eyes open," he said with a faint smile. "The West is still wild, and its stories never really end." Clara smiled back, a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you for everything." You watched him disappear into the horizon, the rising sun casting long shadows behind him. The past had been harsh, the present uncertain, but the future, your future, was waiting. And as you stood there, feeling the warmth of morning after a night of secrets and danger, you realized something important. Surviving in the Wild West wasn't about being the fastest or the toughest. It was about courage, the courage to face the unknown, to uncover the truth, and to protect what mattered most. The story of Lament might be over for now, but the lesson stayed with you, a reminder that even the most boring, dusty corners of history hold deep and wild tales. Tales worth telling, even if they lull you to sleep. Because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that teach us how to survive and how to live no matter the odds. Tools.